You've already eaten sugar today, maybe a lot of it, and there's a good chance you never tasted a single sweet thing. It's in your bread, your pasta sauce, the healthy yogurt, the salad dressing that swears it's good for you. Here's the strange part. Go back just a few generations, and almost none of this was true. Sugar was rare, precious, something you kept under lock and key. Today, the average American eats about 17 teaspoons of it a day, most of it hidden, most of it added by someone else. This isn't really the story of a food. It's the story of how that food got everywhere and how you were taught to stop noticing. And a surprising amount of it traces back to a single scientific review published in 1967. Stay with me, because to understand how sugar ended up in 3 out of 4 things on your shelf, you have to start back when it had almost no power at all. For most of human history, sugar was a luxury so rare it was called white gold. In medieval Europe, it sat in apothecaries, sold as medicine by the gram beside the spices. Kings displayed it at feasts the way you'd display jewelry. A single sculpture of spun sugar could tell every guest in the room exactly how rich you were. And because it was rare, it barely touched anyone's health. You simply couldn't get enough of it to matter. But rarity is a problem to be solved, and solving it carried a terrible cost. For centuries, the sweetness that reached European tables was produced by enslaved people on plantations across the Caribbean and the Americas under some of the most brutal conditions in the history of farming. So from very early on, sugar was never just food. It was money and it was power, and someone was always paying for it. In the 1800s, industry did what industry does. It made the rare thing cheap. Machines replaced hands. Refineries turned raw cane and beet into a pure white powder that never spoiled and never varied. And whoever controlled that powder controlled a fortune. By the late 1800s, one man, Henry Havemeyer, had folded most of America's refineries into a single giant known as the Sugar Trust. At its peak, it controlled around 98% of the sugar refined in the United States. 98%. Nearly all of a nation's sugar running through one set of hands. So by the early 20th century, sugar wasn't a treat anymore. It was an ingredient. Cheap, reliable, and loved by the human tongue, which meant companies had every reason to put it everywhere. Not just in candy, in bread, in soup, in canned vegetables, in baby food. And here's what almost nobody connected at the time. As sugar quietly spread into everything, something else was climbing too. Heart disease. By the 1960s, it was the #1 killer of Americans, and scientists were racing to find the cause. 2 suspects sat at the top of the list. One was dietary fat. The other was sugar. In Britain, a physiologist named John Yudkin argued in study after study that sugar deserved far more of the blame than fat. He laid it out in a book with a title that left little room for doubt: Pure, White, and Deadly. But the leading voice on the other side was an influential American researcher, Ansel Keys, and Keys was a sharp public critic of Yudkin's work. As the fat hypothesis gained ground, Yudkin's warnings about sugar were increasingly pushed to the margins of the debate. And that question, fat or sugar, mattered enormously to one particular industry, because a world that fears sugar is a world that buys less of it. So in 1965, Sugar's trade group, then called the Sugar Research Foundation, started a small internal project. On the books, it had a number, Project 226. Here's what that project was. Decades later, researchers at the University of California, San Francisco dug up the industry's own internal documents, and they showed that the Sugar Research Foundation had paid Harvard researchers to write a review of the science on sugar, fat, and heart disease. It supplied studies it wanted included. It saw drafts before publication. That review came out in 1967 in one of the most respected medical journals in the world, the New England Journal of Medicine. Its takeaway? The case against sugar was thin. Keep your eye on fat. And nowhere in it did the review mention who had paid for it. Adjusted for today, the scientists were paid around $49,000, and that funding stayed out of public view for nearly 50 years. That's the part that lands. Sugar didn't win the argument on the merits. On this one pivotal review, a trade group helped write the conclusion and left its name off the page. To be fair, this is one review from a different era of science. The modern Sugar Association has said such practices should be judged by the disclosure standards of their time, not today's. You can decide how much comfort that offers. But its timing mattered because of what the country did next.
10 years later, in 1977, the United States government released its first ever national dietary goals, advice that would ripple into school lunches, food labels, and doctors' offices for decades. And one of the experts who helped shape that thinking was Mark Hegsted, one of the very same Harvard researchers the sugar industry had quietly paid a decade earlier. Now, those 1977 goals actually did tell Americans to eat less sugar too, by roughly 40%. But that wasn't the message that stuck. The one that reshaped the grocery store was simpler and far more profitable to act on. Eat less fat. And that's where the trap springs. Because when you pull the fat out of food, you pull out flavor. So to make low fat taste like anything, manufacturers reached for the cheapest, most reliable flavor they had: sugar. So the war on fat didn't shrink sugar, it moved it into everything else. And if you grew up in the 80s or 90s, you lived inside the result. The fat-free cookies you were told were the healthy choice. The low-fat label you reached for that quietly carried more sugar than the version it replaced. That was the era's promise, and you were the one buying it. Today, by one analysis from UC San Francisco, roughly 74% of packaged foods in the American supermarket contain added sugar. Not just the candy aisle, the whole store. And around the same time, a second force pushed prices down even further. Corn, grown in vast government-subsidized quantities, could be turned into high-fructose corn syrup for less than the cost of sugar.
It was cheap, it was liquid, and it flowed into sodas and sauces and bread across the country. In late 1984, Coca-Cola and Pepsi switched to it, and much of the industry followed. Which brings us to the question your body has been waiting to ask. If sugar is now in 3 out of 4 things on the shelf, what is all of it actually doing once it's inside you? Here's what researchers can say with reasonable confidence. One type of sugar, fructose, is processed mainly by your liver. In modest amounts, that's no problem at all. The concern researchers raise is about large amounts, consumed regularly, over years, where studies suggest the liver may convert some of that excess into fat. A few scientists have even compared how the liver handles a lot of fructose to how it handles alcohol. That comparison is debated, but it's why this is a live scientific question, not settled fact. Then there's the brain. Some studies, many of them in animals, suggest sugar can activate the same reward pathways that push us to seek things out and come back for more. Whether that adds up to true addiction in humans is something researchers genuinely still argue about. But you don't need the word addiction to notice the imbalance. The average American takes in around 17 teaspoons of added sugar a day. The American Heart Association suggests a ceiling closer to 6 teaspoons for women and 9 for men. And most of that gap isn't coming from the sugar bowl. It's coming from the places you'd never think to check. A spoonful of it in the sandwich bread, more in the pasta sauce, more in the drink labeled natural. On ingredient lists, it hides under more than 60 different names: cane juice, dextrose, maltose, rice syrup, and dozens more. Most of it you were never really meant to notice. And that, in a way, is the whole story.
Because this didn't happen all at once, or by one hand. A trade group shaped one review. A rivalry sidelined an inconvenient scientist. A government picked the simpler message. An industry followed the cheapest ingredient. No single villain, just a lot of choices that all pointed the same direction. And the newest chapter isn't even history. In 2015, when the World Health Organization urged people to keep added sugar under 10% of their calories, and ideally under 5, parts of the industry pushed back hard, questioning the evidence. The faces change, the move rarely does. So think back to where we started, to the sugar you ate today without tasting it. For years, we've framed this as a matter of willpower, as if the only thing between you and less sugar is you. But that framing quietly leaves out everything you've just heard. It was rare, and industry made it cheap. It was doubted, and a trade group paid to soften the doubt.
It ended up nearly everywhere, and mostly out of sight. Sugar didn't take over the American diet by being irresistible. It took over by being invisible. And there's one chapter I left out on purpose. Because when the pressure on sugar finally grew too loud to ignore, the industry offered a way out. A whole aisle of sugar-free, the artificial sweeteners, the honeys and agaves sold as the natural, healthier choice. Are they? That's the next video. So tell me in the comments, which sweetener should we put under the microscope first? Because once you can see sugar, you start seeing it everywhere.